and that's the goal. And that's one of the beautiful things too, is I think there's messages in every reading that other people can take away. Even if you're not sitting in that chair receiving that experience, I think when you see other people's loved ones validate where they're at in their life, or maybe how they lived or how they died, I think people can take that as an opportunity to apply that to their loved ones, to know that there's still some connection.
Do you get, we see this in this show too, like, you know, where you're involved in this, where you're like, maybe this was a hit and run. Do you get a lot of requests from people like, you know, police and like authorities to be involved? I mean, there's only so much of you to go around, but do you get a lot of that?
Absolutely. And even before doing the show, there was a lot of interest regarding missing people, families of missing people that had reached out. And what this really taught me in doing the show was that working with a private investigator was a must. As a medium, I have no control over what I get. And so it was helpful to share those impressions with an intermediary, somebody who was involved in the case, but not so close to it that they were like a family member, because it allowed me to share what I got honestly, concisely, and with ease, even if it was bad news. And I've learned that that's kind of one of the valuable ways to do it if I'm going to touch on missing persons or anomalous cases. I'm at a place in my ability where I feel like I'm still learning and still growing as a medium. So I hope that in my 30s and my 40s, as I get older, that I can do more in that realm. But it has to be done ethically and in a way that, in my opinion, it works best through a private investigator versus working with families directly, because it's just too personal.
Yeah, I would imagine that it gets really personal. Well, speaking of personal, your mom's a big part of this series. We learned that she learned only like 2-3 years ago that she was raised by people that were not her biological parents, and she was kidnapped when she was young, and that the person who raised her was a convicted murderer. I mean, talk to me about this. Like, I mean, I can't even imagine the emotions that your mother and then you must have gone through when this happened in real life.
In so many ways, I found myself relating to the vulnerability that the clients show when they're getting read, because I found myself in a very vulnerable position of needing clarity, needing answers that I couldn't provide for myself, and trying to help my mom get a semblance of kind of answers or clarity or closure. This all happened just naturally, as we learned in the past few years that the people I thought were my grandparents were not. A lot of people wonder intuitively if I ever had any suspicions, and the answer is actually yes. I had asked my mom as a child, are you sure that Stella is your mom? Are you sure? And she'd say, oh, we look too much alike. We have to be, as much as we don't want to be. So I definitely had a hunch, but only did we really get the science to back it recently, with coming back as a completely different heritage than I thought I was, from an ancestry test, and kind of the journey it set us down.
And your mother never thought to maybe listen to you when you were saying this based on your gifts? And
you know, I was young, and I think kids say a lot of things, and you know, I think the resemblance really was uncanny. They really have almost like the same exact face, so it would be very easy to think, oh, that's, you know, biological relative.
wow, that's just, I mean, I can't imagine that. Is it harder when, I mean, and do people in your life that are cousins, friends, I mean, do you get a lot of like, hey, we're at a party, by the way, you got 5 minutes, Tyler, do you want to go over in the corner and do something for me? Like, do you get a lot of requests from people you know?
Absolutely. And I keep a very tight circle. But funny enough, even for the people who don't want readings in my life, I sometimes am the one giving them the readings and actually reaching out to them. Even with my partner of 5 years, Clint, there's still times where we'll be hanging out, unwinding and late at night, and I'll look over at him and I'm like, you need to call home because of so-and-so and so-and-so. And so often it'll end up making sense. He'll call home, something just happened. And so it's kind of a way of keeping tabs from a distance. And it does occur, and it's always really strange. He appreciates it, which I appreciate, but it definitely could be kind of weird for somebody who's not used to having a medium in their life.
He does appreciate it, because I would say, I mean, I would appreciate it. I would think someone would appreciate it, but I guess I could see the alternative. I mean, doesn't he feel it like leads to protection, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of nice to know we have eyes, you know, on his family in Georgia, and we're in California. So it's never a dull moment.
How do you handle like what we talked about? Like, you're at the grocery store, you know, like people might come up to you and cry because they've seen life after death, or, but you know, I imagine they then might want a reading on the spot. Like, how do you, I mean, you can't, how do you handle that?
Sure. Well, I definitely don't travel with my notebook. I'm always like, oh, no notebook. I don't know. Then they're like, here's a napkin. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. We'll give it a shot. But, I do explain to people that there is a time and a place. And I want to make sure that if they're going to have the experience, that we have the right environment where they're going to get the most out of that experience. And so typically it takes about an hour. I like to have, some allocated kind of quiet time. And when I explain that that's necessary for the process, people tend to understand. But so often I'll give people free readings. People who do run into me, I often will feel I'm kind of meant to run into. And so very often, I'll give them my assistant's number, they'll set it up, and then we do the reading. And it's how I do a lot of my readings. I just kind of let meaningful coincidence guide me to whoever I'm meant to connect with.
Wow. When you started doing this, when you had this discovery at 10, did you ever in your wildest dreams, even when you started the show, think that your real life wait list would be 300,000 people? That's crazy.
I am still so humbled by that fact. And for me, it's just a reminder of how lucky I am and how privileged I am to be in my position. It's so tricky because as an introverted person, I wish I could do what I do kind of anonymously. If anything, like the fame aspect is more of a hindrance for me. I wish that I could just kind of duplicate myself and help as many people as I could. And it really is a reminder, that it's about the work more than anything.
Right. And it's really bringing so much peace and happiness to so many people.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned your partner, Clint. Yes, you just celebrated your 5-year anniversary. Listen, you met at a young age. So does this ability, which deals with people that have passed away, does it carry over to your life? You got a relationship right out of the bat or early on in life. Do you have a sense of just meeting people in the here and now of you're a good person, I can tell your intentions, or it doesn't really work that way? I'm just now putting things up on you and giving you powers that you don't really have.
No, I love it. You know what? We all have an intuition, and the word intuition breaks down to inner tuition or inner knowledge. And it's something we all can tap into. I certainly do in my life. I would say readings are an intuitive process, right? I have to go with kind of an inward process. I have to trust what I'm getting. But equally, I definitely can get that semblance or that sense with living people. So versus categorizing people as good people or bad people, I really kind of categorize more people, more along the lines of is this somebody I resonate with or somebody I don't resonate with? And that kind of understanding of resonance has allowed me to cultivate some really meaningful relationships that have hung in there, thankfully. So I tend to get a pretty good first impression of whether I'm compatible with somebody or whether I'm not. And so I just kind of adjust accordingly and do my best to kind of meet that in whatever way is necessary.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I don't know if he knew who, quote unquote, you were when you guys first met, but was that, I imagine, like you said, was that a strange thing of what do you do for a living? Was that, I imagine, you're dating for 5 years now, but I imagine before that, people would have some reaction to that.
It was something, he actually had seen me on the Kardashians when I think, I was 18. I was a baby with bad eczema. I was bright red, but I remember going on that show, and shortly after he had seen me and he reached out, and his mom had reached out wanting a reading. And coincidentally, his grandfather had actually just passed away a few months prior and had taken his own life. And so when I got a very strong impression from his grandfather, I shared that with him via private message. And it actually explained why his grandfather did what he did. And it was so specific and so kind of unknowable that he and his family knew this is why his grandfather passed away. And that moment created an immediate bond. I was able to help provide closure to him with that death and with his family, which I think really set a precedent of just being very close right from the get-go. And really, I kind of felt a part of the family in an interesting way right from the beginning.
So really what you're saying is in a roundabout way, not even in a roundabout way, we have Kris Jenner and the Kardashians to thank for your relationship.
You know what, in a roundabout way, or maybe not so roundabout, you're right. That's absolutely the case.
Is this true? I don't know where